Okay, Stella Thomas, and I'm a member of Elios chapter in Florida, Clearwater, Florida.
Who are your parents?
Elizabeth and George Pastis were my parents' names. My parents are both gone. They were all full-blooded Icarians. I was one of 5 daughters, 3 of which have passed away. I have one sister, Dorothy, who's still living, and my brother, the youngest in the family, my brother Bill, who is still with us.
What originally brought your family to America?
Well, what brought every family to America, you know, in our case, my grandfathers came to America at the turn of the century for work, because they needed to have money to send their children to school. And so they came to work with the intention of going back to Icaria to live. They left their wives there and partial families there. And as they went back and returned, because they did take several trips back and returned, my grandmothers had other children, and but the reason that they came was simply to work and go back. That was their reason. And when they saw how wonderful it was to become an American citizen, when they saw what this country had to offer, you know, it was as simple as going to the post office and signing an affidavit to become an American citizen. And both my grandfathers had enough, you know, understanding of what this country had to offer, and the fact that they had these large families. They didn't know what their futures might be. They didn't, and they would never lose their Greek citizenship. They thought they would, go ahead and become American citizens, and their own people were saying to them, "Why do you want to bother? You know, we're all going to go back to Icaria." And my grandfather was the one who told us, and I was sitting at the table where he told us. He said, and I told them, "What? Don't you see what this country has to offer? And how do you know what the future of Icaria is with regard to your children? Why don't you do this?" And as a result of that, they saved families, because they could come on their father's citizenship to America.
Were there any big obstacles that they had to overcome or that you had to overcome?
Not that I knew of, but with my grandparents, not that I knew of. My parents were American. My mother came with her father, and she actually came to keep house for her father. She was just a teenager, and my father came with his father because he didn't have the desire of the other children to become to get any kind of advanced education. So my grandfather brought my father with him to work, and then of course to go back. And then the two of them in their social gatherings, which are all Icarian social gatherings, you know, they fell in love. They knew each other, I think, from Icaria too. My father was from the village of Xilosirti. My mother was from the village of Chrysostomos. And the villages are very close to one another. So they knew of one another if they didn't know one another. And they fell in love. And they decided they wanted to get married. And neither family wanted that to happen, because they knew as soon as their kids would get married, they'd start having a family. And then their dream of going back to Icaria might never materialize. So they were not very happy, you know, with the fact that these two young people who had fallen in love wanted to get married. But they agreed to it, and the inevitable happened. My mother had her first child named after her paternal grandmother, as is our custom, Zaharula. So she was the firstborn. Then I was the second born, named after my grandmother, the maternal side, Stamatula. My name was changed in school. When I went to school, the teachers told my parents that there's no way the teachers could pronounce the same. So we got to do something about it, and they renamed me Stella. So that's the story. And then, of course, the family stayed here. My father was in business. It was the beginning of the Depression era, and he lost his business, and then we went from one place to another while my father was looking for work. And I had an aunt who married a man from Cleveland who was fairly well off, and my aunt wanted her sister to be in Cleveland, and my father got a job in Cleveland. It was a reformatory. He was a guard at a Warrensville, Ohio. It was like a prison for misdemeanors, for people who were not criminals of any kind, and so this is where I went to school then, in Cleveland, Ohio. And of course, then in 1932, the Depression hit, and I can still remember my mother and father sitting by the radio listening to President Roosevelt's chats. You know, they just loved him, and he told them that he was going to do something about this, getting people back to work. And he started these programs, including the CCC, which took in the young people, you know, and put them into environmental kinds of activities, and did all kinds of wonderfully, you know, it was like the WPA, which is probably, that acronym means Works Progress Administration, and the PWA, and all these, and unfortunately the Republicans were opposed to all this. They called that Roosevelt's alphabet soup, and of course they accused him of being a communist, because he said we need to have Social Security. He insisted that we have Social Security. And Social Security, after he fought and fought for it, finally he got it. And it has saved the elderly population. You know, during the recession after the Bush years, when we had that bad recession that Obama then became president and inherited, the one thing they found was that the elderly were not on the streets selling apples to survive. They had at least the Social Security, and that income. And it's an insurance, you know, it's not you pay for it, and if you pass away before you're 65, or I think back then it was 62, you know, your money was gone. It was gone to some other worthwhile cause. But I remember, you know, as a young person, you have such a different perspective. You think, 62? That's old. I'm not going to be 62, you know, and I don't want them to take this money out of my salary. You know, I want to keep that money for myself, and never realizing how important it was. A lot of people, of course, passed away before they could get any of their money back, but the money went to worthwhile causes, worthwhile charitable causes, you know, went to mothers who had lost their husbands and were widowed and had young children, all kinds of worthwhile causes. But thank God for the these are socialistic programs. The first socialistic program that I was interested in was the Pure Food and Drug Act, and that was a socialistic program that was introduced by a Republican administration, Republican president, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt, at the turn of the century, who gave us the Pure Food and Drug Act. and you know, and once again there was a fight for it, because people who wanted no regulations at all said, well, then buyer beware. You know, just if you buy something poisonous and you die, that's the problem with the buyer, instead of having, you know, Pure Food and Drug Act that insisted that the seller ensure that his product was not poisonous. So that's the first socialistic program. Then, of course, came Social Security, and after another socialistic program that Roosevelt started came after World War II, when Roosevelt insisted that we have the GI Bill. The GI Bill, he said, these, like my husband, my own husband, he served for 5 years in the service. He was honorably discharged first lieutenant of the Army Air Corps, and he came out after 5 years of giving his youth to our country's needs. He came back and he got this beautiful thing that Roosevelt fought for against the Republican administrations, against Republicans. I'm sorry to say this, you know, because it sounds as if and I'm not a registered Democrat. I'm registered independent for 3 decades, so, you know, but this was a program that gave the soldiers a chance. Not everybody, you know, when you have free college, you talk about free college, not everybody is going to go make a rush on the universities. You know, there were soldiers who came back who opted, like my husband, to become a civil engineer, who opted to be doctors, who opted to be lawyers, who opted to be all kinds of engineers, you know, to do something professional. But others opted for trades. Others opted just for a decent job with a decent wage with which they could raise their families, you know. Not everybody wanted to get to become a professional. This is why I can't understand when Senator Sanders talks about free college. People think that everybody's going to be rushing to the colleges. No, this is to give the poor, for kids who are born to poor families who do not have the wherewithal to send their kids to college, this opportunity to go to school, and to make a tremendous contribution to our country, a tremendous contribution. And it just bothers me when people argue about these things and talk about socialism as if it's something horrendous. No, we have what I personally believe in, and that is a capitalistic economy, but regulated, a regulated economy, so that 90% of our wealth doesn't go to 1.5% of the population. Because actually, if they look, you know, because I've done a lot of reading of say, Russian literature before the Russian communists took over, the seed to the breeding ground of communism was exactly what's happening here, where a few people had all the money, the middle class was squeezed, the poverty class was growing, and people finally revolted. They revolted. This is very important for people to understand. And then, of course, I remember so clearly, because I was very much an adult at that time, the Medicare. And our own doctor, doctor said, if this socialistic program ever takes place, you'll never get the medical attention that you're getting now. And if it weren't for Medicare, and the supplemental insurance that you have to cover the 20% that Medicare doesn't cover, because Medicare just covers 80% of your needs. If it weren't for that, I'd be out on the street with my husband's issues, my husband's problems. I would be out on the street. I would have nothing left, but with Medicare, I was able to take care of his needs, And this too is an insurance. This is something we pay into. And we don't, when we have fire insurance, we don't pray that there's a fire to come and consume our house so we can get our money back. You know, it's an insurance that we have in the event something horrible should happen, and we're happy to give the money and let it go to waste, hoping that nothing bad will happen. But these are insurances, and they seem to kind of categorize them all as entitlements along with welfare. These are not welfare programs. They're insurances to which people pay into. You know, people need to pay attention to politics. You know, only the politicians tell us that politics and religion should not be discussed. Religion you can't discuss because people take it on faith. You know, whatever your religion is, you take on faith. You don't need any kind of evidence to support it. You just take it on faith. But politics, that's your bread and butter. That's your future. That's the future of your children, your grandchildren, all of these things. And every one of these so-called socialistic programs that we were talking about were all programs to do exactly what the Constitution tells these politicians we elect to represent us. The Constitution tells them, in the preamble, in fact, it tells them, their job is to promote the welfare of the people, and we're the people. This is the reason for these so-called socialistic programs, from the Pure Food and Drug Act, Social Security, the GI Bill, Medicare, and Medicaid now, which and you know, people don't look to see what's happening. Because right now, the thing that frightens me most of all is because but Social Security and Medicare mean a great deal to me, is that this budget, the executive gives the legislature the budget that he wants, and he's taken billions of dollars out of Medicare, billions of dollars out of Social Security, and I think close to $1 trillion out of Medicaid. And you know, this is frightening. This is frightening. And we have a Mitch McConnell, who is the chief of the Senate, who is going along instead of doing what the Constitution tells him that he's supposed to, you know, have a check on the administrative branch, on the executive branch, and it's frightening to me. It's frightening to me.
If you could give one piece of advice to your children or grandchildren, what would that be?
I would say, pay attention to politics. Pay attention, because it's your politics, you know, what these politicians do, these people we elect to represent us, what they do affect our lives. And talk politics. You know, politics, it should be on the dinner table for conversation. The politicians don't want us to do this because they don't want their actions to be contrasted with their words. You know, when you see what they tell you and then you see what they do in contrast to what they tell you, you know, then you realize what the problem is, and you know, the only power we have is that one vote. That's our power, that one vote. And if we cast it against our own interests, and this is what these people do when they don't pay attention to what's going on, they're giving their one vote to somebody who is interested in his own welfare. Now, pay attention to politics, exactly. Pay attention.